Hi, my name's Steve Weiss, and welcome to our first lesson, which is on how macroeconomics can influence your investing. We're going to focus today on Kerkorian. Kerkorian is one of the wealthiest individuals in the world, but not many people really know who he is. So while you may not know him, I doubt that you haven't come into contact with some of the products of the companies that he owns. Perhaps you've seen a James Bond movie. He owns United Artists and MGM Studios. Maybe you've stayed at one of his hotels, the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Or maybe you've driven a car in a company where he used to own a substantial stake. Pick one. It could be GM, Chrysler, or Ford. He was involved in all of them. He's been compared to Howard Hughes because he's somewhat reclusive. He's in his 90s now. But like Howard Hughes, he was involved in Hollywood and he was involved in industry. In fact, like Howard Hughes, he was involved in aviation. That's where he made his first $100 million. But today, we're going to focus on Ford and the hotel business and how the cross-section of these two investments, combined with a deteriorating macroeconomy, caused him to book nearly $1 billion loss. I'd like to give you more background on Kerkorian and why it's apropos of our lesson on macroeconomics and how it influences investing. At age 9, he started bringing in a paycheck he had to help support the household, his brothers and his parents. His father, an Armenian immigrant, barely spoke English. At one point, his father actually had made a lot of money. He became a raisin farmer. But then, in the post-World War I recession, raisin prices dropped by 40%, and he was broke again. Kirk would quit school after the 8th grade, bounce around a bunch of jobs, and at 24, he got into a job that he liked, and his boss brought him along on a flying lesson. Kirk was hooked. After that flying lesson, he decided he wanted to be in the business. So he borrowed $60,000, and he bought a bunch of old bombers from the war. Now, he didn't buy the bombers for the planes. He bought them for the fuel. That was the most attractive asset there because fuel was in short supply after World War I. He sold the fuel, then he rebuilt the bombers and took on some of the most dangerous routes delivering freight. Two things about this. Number one, he had an appetite for risk, which you have to have if you're going to be an investor. The second part of it is that he borrowed money, margin, leverage. That's part of your risk appetite. And actually, it's a third thing. The third thing is he saw value where nobody else did. He eventually would sell that aviation business for $85 million, a substantial profit. Took 20 years, but he's also a patient man. Kirk was a gambler, and he used to go to Las Vegas. And he again saw value there in barren land that was opposite the hotels and what was not a built-up Las Vegas at that point. He would eventually sell that land, buy more land, and build the world's largest hotel at the time, the MGM. But of course, when you're building something that big, you have to borrow money to do it. Eventually, he sold that, and then he went and he bought another piece of land and built what was then the world's largest hotel. Kirk was very good at navigating the economy. And as Warren Buffett said, be greedy when others are fearful and be fearful when others are greedy. Warren Buffett did it himself. He bought Goldman Sachs during the financial crisis of 2008 and would later make a $5 billion profit on it. Well, Kirk did the same thing. Perhaps he took less of his father, who got caught in a post-World War I recession. So he was very careful, but then he got caught. Kerkorian loved U.S. cars. At a time when he could drive a Rolls-Royce, a Bentley, and a Mercedes, he owned a Jeep, a Ford Taurus, and a Pontiac. He loved cars so much, he decided that he was going to get involved in the stocks. In 1990, when the economy began to spiral into recession that would come full-blown, at the end of the year and in '91, and Chrysler was spiraling into bankruptcy, requiring the government to step in with $1 billion bailout, Kirk saw value, and it was a brilliant play. He would eventually sell that stake for $3 billion a number of years later, when Mercedes-Benz, Daimler-Benz, took over the company. Next up was GM. Kirk saw opportunity there in what was a poorly managed company. He went and he bought the stock, tried to get them to change their ways a little bit, but didn't work out. So he walked away from the company, sold his stock, but he took home 100 million dividends. Great for you and I, but not so good for Kerkorian. He sat idle for a little bit, and then in 2008, when the economy was really falling apart, he probably thought, I'm going to do what I did with Chrysler. I'm going to step in and buy Ford. He had no intention of taking the company over. The family controlled the voting shares. But he saw a stock that had declined from near 20 to $7.50. Thought it was a great value. At the same time, he had his hotel business, which should have also been a warning. And as we mentioned before, to run a hotel, to own a big hotel, you have to borrow from the banks and you have to sell bonds because you don't have enough cash to run it yourself. So that was a highly leveraged investment. And when the economy started to fall apart, the banks and the bondholders got a little worried. So as two worlds collided, courtesy of a really deteriorating economy. In fact, the worst economy we've seen since the Great Recession. So Kirk was forced to sell his Ford stock at $2.50, booking an $800 million loss. Now, in fairness, Ford would eventually rise to $15 a share, but Kirk didn't have the freedom of choice because he was too levered and didn't see the bad economy coming. And that's how the macroeconomy can influence your investing.